if we stopped posting tomorrow, literally no one would care for 99% of brands. And I think that's the harsh truth that we need to realize. So what can we do so that we can increase our chances of not just people caring, but also doing something for the business?
You can also subscribe to extended cuts where my guests go deeper into how they actually think, make decisions, and handle the messy bits. But for now, enjoy the conversation. This is Marketing Careers Uncovered, and I'm Dev Hayward. Social isn't the new kid on the block anymore. For a lot of businesses, it's a central part of how they show up, how they're judged, and how people really experience them day to day. We're going to be talking about what it really looks like when social grows up and whether the way we run it has grown up with it. Beth Thomas is the co-founder of Slice, where she works with brands trying to bring clarity and intent back into social. But before that, she's worked inside fast-moving consumer brands and at platform level, so really seeing firsthand how social scales and also where it starts to lose its way. So without stealing too much of your thunder, Beth, welcome. And why don't you start with telling us a little bit more about yourself and also how you describe the problem that most teams are still wrestling with when it comes to social?
Yes. Hi, thank you for having me on. I am Beth Thomas. I've worked in social and influencer marketing for over a decade, worked platform side, as you said, at TikTok, brand side at a few different brands from small startups, scale ups, tech, in beauty, in food, in all sorts of things really. And also I'm a content creator. So I feel like I've really seen it from the three different sides kind of that there are to see it. Everything is so busy, a million miles an hour. I never had time to step back and really think, what is this all actually for? What am I trying to do? And I think that probably is one of the main problems with social, is that lots of us started as probably the youngest person in the team back 10 plus years ago. And because lots of the wider business never understood social, they kind of left us to do whatever we wanted to do. And I think because of that, we haven't learned lots of the fundamentals of marketing and what that is. And that's something that we at Slice are trying to really help brands achieve, is bringing social back into brand, looking at that brand strategy. What's the business actually trying to achieve? And how can social play its part in that? And the more conversations that I have now, the more this is sticking out like a kind of sore thumb of social teams creating content and churning content out. But if you ask them, what actually are you doing that for? What is our goal here? They can't really answer. What are we actually trying to do? Who are we trying to reach? Not, the tactics that we're using to do it. And depending on what that is, will depend on what you measure. So there's no one size fits all if you're trying to change perceptions of something on social. And I think this is the best example is Michael that I work with, who was head of social at Ryanair. And what him and his brilliant team did there was realizing that, they could make loads of pieces of content about palm trees and planes and whatever it was that everyone in the travel space was doing. Was that going to do anything for Ryanair? Probably not. And what he quite quickly realized was actually that it was the perception of Ryanair in a really specific age group of like millennials that they wanted to change. And they thought, if we can use social for one thing, let's try and do that. And everything that, all the tactics was like the taking the piss out of people for booking, seat 11A or whatever it was with the no window and all of this stuff that people know about. That was all laddering back to trying to change perceptions of the brand. And the measurements that they used was getting a question in the brand survey. Lots of big brands have brand surveys that they pay a lot of money for. Often social doesn't get a look into those. So that is something that they did to ask. I can't remember whether it was like, do you hate Ryanair less because of social, or do you like Ryanair more because of the social content? And they wanted to increase the number from whatever it started at to higher on that scale. And over that 18-month period, they did that. So that is proving that actually we can use social and have an actual business impact. So it totally depends what you are trying to do. And first of all, people need to take a step back from the constant posting cycle that everyone seems to be in, and think about, what are we actually doing on social? If we can't answer that question, everyone just needs to have a sit down and take some time to really think about what that is and work on that, because otherwise everyone just falls into this trap. And so many of my friends work in social, and I have also fallen into that trap of just posting without thinking, if we stopped posting tomorrow, literally no one would care for 99% of brands. And I think that's the harsh truth that we need to realize. So what can we do so that we can increase our chances of not just people caring, but also doing something for the business? So the main thing that we do at Slice is working on strategies with teams. And the main thing I think that I've in brands that I've worked at before, I haven't seen done is, so we take a framework from brand strategy, the 4 C's, but we tweak that and do that for social. But I think the main part is this discovery phase, where we speak to so many people in the business, because they know the business way more than us. And also, even if you're in the social team, you often don't have a chance to properly sit down and ask these sorts of questions to the CRM team or SEO, or depending on how big the company or how different people and different levels are involved in social or want to be. That to me is, if I went brand side, I would make sure that was what I was doing. I also think it would be so interesting if anyone who's changing jobs, people always talk about, you don't go straight in, you take some time and you chat to people in the business. But often you go in and they're like, especially if you work in social, right? What, the post stops tomorrow, so what's going out? And you're there as like head of social being like, I don't even know what this business is yet. I haven't worked anything out. So really having I guess it's like confidence to push back when conversations like that come and say, I need to spend some time working out what we're doing and having conversations with people in the business so that, I can put a plan together. Because so often it just falls into instantly just falling back into that loop of creating the same content. And often, I say to friends and some, when we go into other businesses, like, really, what is the worst that's going to happen if you don't post for 2 weeks? Like, is anything going to happen? Would anybody care? Everyone could probably make the most of taking some time and not posting and not spending that time on the churn to think about this much larger picture. Because if you don't take that time, then it's so much harder to do it when you're in it.
It sounds like one of the really helpful things that someone could do is just mentally right now ask yourself, who have you spoken to outside of your immediate team or department in the last couple of weeks?
I think especially if you're sort of a head of social or a social lead, and you're still in the day-to-day of everything that's going on, that's not how social is going to grow for that business. I think, people talk about when you're like a founder or something, working on the business rather than in the business. And I think often, because heads of social have come up through the ranks, there's not many people I don't know anyone actually who's a head of social that hasn't been a social exec, a social manager, and being that doer. So I think that switch, I guess, for all, no matter what your role is, like, doing that switch is often quite difficult, to be like, okay, hands are a bit more off now and I need to think differently. So putting time into having conversations with other people who are at the same level as you and getting learnings from them as well, because social media is still like a new job in relation to, all the other jobs in businesses have sort of been around for a long time, I guess, apart from AI and things that are newer than social. But we still are those newer kids on the block trying to figure it out. So not being afraid, I think, of having conversations with people that you trust to say, I actually not really sure if I'm getting anywhere here. Because I think a lot of times everybody's pride gets in the way, which I understand, because everyone I know is trying to get a promotion and a pay rise. So you don't want to be saying, I don't really know what I'm doing. So finding your people where you can have those conversations.
Yeah, but it's moving things on from I guess I'm not quite sure what I'm doing, but I'm not quite sure why I'm doing this. Why am I doing? Where does this sit? What function does it serve? And social's a bit of a weird one anyway in the channel mix, because it genuinely, to me anyway, does feel new every couple of years. Yeah, there's never been any role that has been so intensely tied to a platform and the whims of sort of 4 or 5 men across Silicon Valley. So yeah, it does. It does feel like you have to really learn and relearn, but ground yourself in some of that broader context, and you could probably save yourself quite a bit of stress and worrying along the way. So how do you go about resetting a social program that has those hallmarks of busy but a bit pointless?
Yeah, I think it's looking at if you actually have a strategy or do you just have content pillars. And I think if social can solve or be part of solutions to business problems, whether that's finding new audiences. So one of the brands we were working with last year, they spent huge budgets and were spending loads of money on TV ads, radio ads and those sorts of things. They were also doing that. Their data team was telling us that for people who are, I guess, my age, millennials and older, they had like a tagline that when we were young, we knew. So we still remember it. But people who are sort of under 30, if you talk to them about this brand, they've never heard of it. Whereas to us, it was like a household name and something that we still say as like slang for something. Sorry, I don't know if I can say who they are. Anyway, I don't think it matters who they are. But so one of their main issues, which was so clear to us, was that they had this huge market that didn't have a clue who they were and that they weren't reaching in any other of their marketing channels. So to us, it was like, well, that is the perfect place for social to come in. Is you're looking, a problem is you're not reaching this audience, and social can definitely be the solution to that, because people of that age are, so highly indexed on social and on different channels. So the problem that we were looking to solve was, one of the problems was that, and that social could definitely do that. So that was like the basis of working out what then we were going to do on social and how we could actually reach those people. And that's when I've talked about a little bit today. We also realized through our insights and the research we were doing that a huge amount of Gen Zs or people under 30, in my mind, are using social search instead of Google and even over AI. I'm sure that's going to continue to change and fluctuate. So it was like, okay, so not only can we reach this new market, we also know that they're searching for things related to what we're doing, and we're never showing up in it because we're just we're doing content over here that's got nothing to do with this. So putting all those things together was, these are the ways we can solve this problem, and this is how we can use social to show up in search. And then the KPIs follow from that as well, of, okay, what does success look like for us? So those basics that we talked about of, the watch through rates or the impressions, and then looking at the audience that we're reaching, and then also looking at, okay, where are they coming from? Is our search plan working? So lots of things that sort of all flow together there. But the things I would look at in general are, yeah, who are we? Who are our competitors? What are they doing? Because I think so much of what we see again is, if you go on social and look at nearly any brand account, everyone is building the category rather than building their brand. And that is something that we're sort of banging the drum about and trying to get people to realize, because I don't really know how it's happened. I feel like brands were more different, and now they all are doing and saying the same thing. They're all sounding the same. They're all in the same comment sections. They're all making the same comments. They're all
Yeah, they all seem to be on trend, don't they?
Exactly. But now being on trend is the biggest risk, I think, because you look and sound like everyone else. And if we are all, I think, pretty immersed in this world. So if you ask someone who didn't work in marketing or in social, to name a brand that did this trend or was in this comment section that, everybody on LinkedIn thinks is great, I'd imagine that most people wouldn't be able to do that, because there's nothing distinct about brands anymore. Everybody is very much blurring into the wallpaper.
Yeah, yeah, and yeah, from my experience, a lot of what brand needs is to be clearly distinctive, but also bloody consistent as well.
Yeah,
So we cannot be swapping and chopping and changing to suit whatever tastes there are out there every 12 to 24 months, because it just fries the brain really, and you can't recall any of it.
yes, and I think that is work that we're seeing more people talking about too. So I don't know if you know System One, the sort of research platform. They're looking at social a little bit more and highlighting things there, and they're talking about distinct assets and recall and consistency and using the same fundamentals that you have in mind of just marketing forever is like doing something, having one message, delivering it well over a huge amount of time so that people actually can recall it. But for some reason on social, we don't think about, like, the social world often doesn't think about that. So I think, one way of doing that is, the mascots. And we saw everyone have a mascot, but the brands that did it well, who already had something in their brand universe that they took and they then delivered on social, was a distinct asset that made them stand out. The same as, the lines, people always talk about, like, oh, but Specsavers are so good at having their should have gone to Specsavers. That's because that has been drilled into everyone through so many touch points over a huge amount of years. Whereas on social, if you're just, you're talking about this one week, then you're doing a trend, then you're talking about Taylor Swift, now you're trying to sell a product. Like, it needs to all have this thing at the top, this strategy. I just call the thing. That's what Chris in my team once said to me when he started. I was like, how would you describe a strategy? And he's like, well, there's loads of definitions, but I just call it like the thingy that's up here that everything ladders back to. And I was like, I actually like that, because I don't need to, I think sometimes we can use all these marketing words and you just lose people. But to me, it's like, visually, it's the thingy up here, and everything you do is trying to do that. And a way to know if you have a strategy, I personally think, is if you can push back on the business. If they tell you we need to talk about X, Y, and Z, or we've got this asset from this shoot, we needed to go on social. If you have a strategy, you usually can push back if it doesn't work for it.
I want to pull on the thread of measuring what matters there. Yeah, we talked a little bit about that already, but it really, for me, is central to that point. So, everyone talks about social, and everyone must feel it's important in some shape or form. Otherwise, we won't be asking for 50 million posts a week to cover X, Y, and Z. But we're really talking about proving value here and what good measurement actually looks like. So you've covered some of those metrics already, but what I'm really interested to further explore is how you start to measure and get a sense of things which don't have an obvious number. So let's think about things like brand perception and recall. Yeah, if you're targeting a particular audience subset or whatever, how do you start to get a sense of that and tie back to social to make the point that this thing has a real tangible impact of a business?
Yeah, this was something that was actually so helpful when Chris joined at the team. He has worked at agencies for like 10 years, so I guess has sort of learned so much there, which is different to, I think, when you work brand side. So I feel like the three of us together have all like got all of these different insights and learnings. But he was talking to one of our clients saying, it's costs a lot of money for you to run a brand survey with a big house, which I actually have never done one, so I don't know the names of the big ones. But he said, but what you can do is just run it yourself in Meta as you would a paid ad, and targeting, the audience that's seen it, the audience that haven't, and having your questions there. You literally can test all of these things. Again, you need some budget, but it's going to be nothing like using one of those tools whose sole purpose is to run these huge brand surveys. So, I think, as we said, you've got to do some things yourself with the small amount that you have to prove something. And then the conversation turns much bigger into, okay, if you as a business then do run these expensive brand surveys, which most of the big brands do, then now that you've sort of taken this data and proved this, and you then want more buy-in from the business, then you have that conversation of, can we take a question in the next month's brand survey? So I think there are ways to literally prove our theories one way or another on social.
If you could get every marketing or business leader to change just one thing about how they treat social, what would that be? Here's your opportunity. Fire the shot.
It's a two-way thing, isn't it? And I know this was probably a quick thing, but my first proper conversation I had with Michael, who's now my business partner, was that I was complaining that social teams didn't have the respect in businesses, and I was working all the time. I was burnt out. I was a yes person. I was saying yes to everything, and I didn't understand why I wasn't feeling more respected and social wasn't being more respected. And he said to me, Beth, to be respected, you need to earn respect. And I was so annoyed with him because I was like, what do you mean? I'm like breaking my back out here for this. And now that, the dust has settled, I've realized that I think he was very right in that everything we've said today, it's such a two-way street. We want to be respected by the C-suite, but we need to be able to talk the language and prove what we're doing more so than, we went viral last month, like, great, but what did that do? Actually, is that something to celebrate anymore? If it is because you went viral within your target market and that was, all these other things that we've talked about today, great. But I think that we both, from top down and bottom up, have a job to do to like meet in the middle, that these people don't necessarily understand social, because when they were going up in their career, it wasn't a thing. Maybe it didn't even exist in some of the brands that we talk to. Whereas now we need to educate those people, and then once we show, and just, I'm not saying we need to bloody change a business, but once we start as a social teams having these little indications of these little changes and these 1% that have turned into something that are laddering back to the thingy, that then we are given more respect and getting seats at those tables that we need to be at. But we can't just expect, well, it would be great to expect to be there, but I think that's not real life. So if we want to be there, and I think everyone in social has a job to do, that we all need to talk their language.
I think that's a really good place to finish up. We know that social is still and will continue to be one of the most visible ways in which we connect with the customers through our brands, and really deserves some of that grown up thinking that we talked about. And what's come through for me really is that attention on its own isn't the job. Having that clarity and clear intent and a strategy you can point to go, this is why we're doing this, and this is the benefit in commercial terms to what we're doing. So thank you so much for helping guide us through this conversation and just being really honest about what good looks like and some of the frustrations when social grows up. So, thank you ever so much for joining us today, and thanks to you for listening. If you enjoyed today's conversation, don't forget to subscribe for future episodes, leave a review, or share with your friends and colleagues. And we'll see you next time. You can also subscribe to extended cuts of these conversations, where my guests go deeper into how they actually think, make decisions, and handle the messy bits.